Alright, this is Job 7 in the MacArthur Study Bible and the Endearing Word Commentary. Alright, let's begin. So, for a review in chapter 6, Job responded to Eliphaz, and pretty much the gist of that chapter is that Job had a very good reason to rant the way he did in chapter 3. And then, of course, challenging Eliphaz and the friends to prove his wrongdoing, if in fact he was guilty of wrongdoing, as Eliphaz charged. Alright, and then Job will continue his speech here in chapter 7, starting with the first 5 verses. In this first section, this first section of the first 10 verses, the comfortless suffering of Job, and then starting with these first 5 verses, the hard service of Job's suffering. Well, those are the section titles in the Endearing Word Commentary, but anyway. Alright, we'll start with the first 5. Is there not a time of hard service for a man on earth? Are not his days also like the days of a hired man, like a servant who earnestly desires the shade, and like a hired man who eagerly looks for his wages? So I've been allotted months of futility, and wearisome nights have been appointed to me. When I lie down, I say, when shall I rise, and the night be ended? For I have my fill of tossing until dawn, and my flesh is caked with worms and dust. My skin is cracked and breaks out afresh. Okay. Now here's a little summary of this whole chapter here, according to MacArthur. So after having directed his words at his friends in chapter 6, Job is directing his words now to God. Throughout this section, he used words and arguments that would sound more like Solomon in Ecclesiastes, i.e. some words like labor, vanity, trouble, and breath. Alright, and then in the first 5 verses, and MacArthur has some more to say about verses 6 through 10, but I'm going to first look at what he has to say about the first 5. Alright, so Job felt like a slave under tyranny of his master, longing for relief and reward. So that is the first 2 verses. And then also he was sleepless in 3 and 4, and he was loathsome because of the worms and scabs and dried filth and new running sores. Basically his sores on his body. Alright, and then Endearing Word has a little bit to say here, especially about verse 3. I've been allotted months of futility. And Job saw his present suffering like the futile, discouraging work of a servant or a hired hand. He felt there was no hope or reward, only just weariness. And the words hard service in the first verse are according to Adam Clarke and others. Okay, so that's the name of that Clarke guy that sometimes gets quoted. They are descriptive of military service, and the Latin Vulgate translates the life of a man is a warfare upon earth. And the early English Coverdale translation has it, is not the life of man upon the earth a very battle? With this, Job communicated both the struggle of life together with the idea that he had been drafted unwillingly into this battle. Yep. I guess this battle of suffering. Yep. And wearisome nights have been appointed to me. So Job described his physical condition in painful terms. He suffered from insomnia and skin affliction, came back and back again. And then Clarke said about Job saying, my flesh is caked with worms, The figure is too horrid to be further illustrated. Yep. probably having worms all over his body. Yep. And also dust, and it's cracked and it breaks out afresh. So just a lot of sores and scabs and probably pus and blood coming out of the cracks and stuff like that. It's just horrible. Horrible. Alright, and then feeling like a hired servant who's now getting paid basically in wages of futility and just suffering. Yep, and being appointed to suffer. Yep, and just feeling miserable and just hurting. Alright, and then he goes on in verses 6 through 10, and Job mourns the futility of life. Alright. So my days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle, and are spent without hope. Oh, remember that my life is a breath. My eye will never again see good. The eye of him who sees me will see me no more. While your eyes are upon me, I shall no longer be. As a cloud disappears and vanishes away, so he who goes up to the grave does not come, so he who goes down to the grave does not come up. He shall never return to his house, nor shall his place know him any more. Alright, then MacArthur is saying that Job was like a weaver's shuttle tossed back and forth, verse 6, and he was like a breath or a cloud that comes and goes away to death, and that's in the verse 7 through 10. And in this discourse, Job attempted to reconcile his own mind with what God is doing. Alright, and then Enduring Word says about the days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle. Now, Job did not mean this in a positive sense, as saying, like, my, look how fast time is going by. No, as described in those previous verses, in the season of affliction time is just dragging for Job through sleepless and painful nights. It just seems to just go on and on and on. Yeah, and yet he looked at his life in totality. It just seemed to be a meaningless blur, spent without any hope as a breath, which is kind of like what Solomon says in Ecclesiastes. Life is meaningless, all is vain. It just looks that way under the sun. Yeah, definitely some similar language. Alright, and then the guy Schmick has a few quotes here. So he quotes this guy Ibn Ezra. He noted a long time ago the play on the word tekwa, which is hope. It could also mean thread. Job's days move fast like a weaver's shuttle, and then they come to an end through want of thread. Now, both meanings were equally intended, and this is kind of the overtone in meaning that cannot be reflected in a translation without a footnote. So the days are just moving quick. Yep, days are moving, but it's just, but he's just got no hope, and it just seems just meaningless. I mean, is there any hope whatsoever? It just seems to be a suffering of no end. Yep. Alright, now worse than the disease itself, Job lost all hope of being healed. He believed, as he said previously in the other chapter, that the only release from pain was death, and that God would just strike him down, just finally put him out of his misery. Alright, so when he says, he who goes down to the grave does not come up, now this is one of Job's statements about the afterlife that are sprinkled throughout the book. And the statements are a combination of uncertainty, as here, and also triumphant confidence. So, not so certain about, what would happen really in the afterlife. Like, is there any hope beyond this world? I mean, when you go into the grave, it just seems maybe though that's it. Alright. And then there's some confidence, in chapter 19, 25 through 26. I may go ahead and take a brief look at that. When he says, "For I know that my Redeemer lives, and he shall stand at last on the earth, and after my skin is destroyed, this I know, that in my flesh I shall see God." So, confidence in that would come, that he would see his God, that on the last day, according to MacArthur, that Job would be vindicated when justice on the earth is finally done. So expressing confidence that later on, maybe after he does die, that God will vindicate him and he will see his Savior. And he knows the Redeemer lives. So there's some confidence later on, but right here, he doesn't seem to be so confident of that coming reality. Alright. And those are the first 10 verses, and then verses 11 through 16, Job's complaint to God. Again, these are just the section titles, an endearing word. Alright, Job's anguish, my soul chooses strangling. Alright, so 11 through 16. Therefore I will not restrain my mouth. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit, and I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. Am I a sea or a sea serpent? A sea serpent that you set a guard over me? When I say my bed will comfort me, and my couch will ease my complaint, and then you scare me with dreams and terrify me with visions, so that my soul chooses strangling and death rather than my body. I loathe my life. I will not live forever. I would not live forever. Leave me alone, for my days are but a breath. Alright. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. Therefore I'm not going to restrain my mouth. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. It's verse 11. So MacArthur says, on that basis of all that he had said in the first 10 verses, therefore he felt he had the right to express his complaint. And then endearing word says, Job cried out to God, first wondering if he were not a dangerous creature, or like a sea or a sea serpent that needed to be guarded and restrained by God. And then MacArthur says, and this is verse 12, MacArthur says, the sea and the whale are two threatening forces that must be watched or curbed due to their destructive force. And Job was not like that. So are you allowing me to suffer then? If I am I as dangerous as the sea or a sea serpent? Are you trying to restrain me? Maybe because I'm dangerous, and somehow by allowing me to suffer like this? Maybe. You're just wondering. Alright. And then Spurgeon has something to say. We hear of persons being shadowed by the police, and certain people feel as though they were shadowed by God. They are mysteriously tracked by the great Holy Spirit, and they know and feel it. And wherever they go, an eye is upon them, and they cannot hide from it. And then Spurgeon also says this, listen, to argue from our own insignificance is poor pleading, for the little things are just those against which there is most need to watch. If you were a whale or a sea, God might leave you alone, but you are a feeble and sinful creature, which can do more hurt than a sea or a whale. You constantly need watching. So do not say, Am I a sea or a sea monster that thou settest a watch over me? For the Lord may answer, you are more, yeah, you are more capacious, yeah, whatever. Yeah, basically you're more inclined for evil or whatever than a sea, and even more wild than a sea monster. And indeed, we are actually more like the sea or sea monsters than we would actually admit. The sea is restless, and so is our sinful nature. And the sea can be furious and terrible, and so are we. The sea can never be satisfied, and neither it can be sinful man. The sea is so mischievous and destructive, and so is sinful man. The sea will not obey, neither will sinful man. Well, unless God tells the sea to obey like Jesus did whenever he calmed the storm. Yeah, even though God tells us to obey, and yet we don't do it, but at least the sea does it. Alright, now Job's words here remind us of something remarkable. Though his physical suffering was intense and prolonged, as John Trapp wrote, okay, that's another person that's quoted. Now I know his first name, John Trapp. He said, his greatest troubles were inward. Job's spiritual crisis was deeper than his physical or material. All right. Well, anyway. But of course, Job is not suffering because of sin or because he's somehow dangerous, like the sea or a sea creature or whatever. So, all right. And when I say my bed will comfort me, my couch will ease my complaint, and then you scare me with dreams and terrify me with visions. So MacArthur says, even while he slept, he had terrifying dreams so that he longed for death, as he says in 15 and 16. And then Enduring Word says, he scared me with dreams, so Job was even denied the comfort of sleep and rest. When he did lay down to sleep upon his bed or couch, he was disturbed with nightmarish dreams and terrifying visions. And then Adam Clarke, says he needed rest by sleep, but was afraid to close his eyes because of the horrid images which were presented to his imagination. And could there be a state more deplorable than this? Yeah. And so because he was having these horrible dreams, and he really can't sleep, since God is allowing him to see these dreams and visions, and now his soul chooses strangling and death rather than my body. His soul. Yep, and then I loathe my life. So Job's condition was so miserable that at this point his soul would prefer the release of death. Yep, his soul would prefer that. Yep, he longed for death, as MacArthur said. So Job was so miserable that he actually just said to God, leave me alone. Yep, I loathe my life. I would not live forever. Leave me alone, for my days are but a breath. Yep. So he tells God, leave me alone. At this moment, it appears to Job that God is the tormentor. Now the reader knows God was using, in secondary means. Yeah, the reader knows God was using in secondary means, and that Job's conception of God as the tormentor was askew. Yeah, according to this, Smick guy. Yeah. So, yeah. Alright, and then Job goes on to say in verses 17 through 21, which is the end of the chapter, Job is appealing to God, have I sinned? Yeah, and then he says this, what is man that you should exalt him, that you should set your heart on him, that you should visit him every morning and test him every moment? How long Will you not look away from me and let me alone till I swallow my saliva? Have I sinned? What have I done to you, a watcher of men? Why have you set me as your target, so that I am a burden to myself? Why then do you not pardon my transgression and take away my iniquity? For now I will lie in the dust, and you will seek me diligently, but I will no longer be. All right. So MacArthur is saying, why is he so important? Job wonders that God would spend all of this time and attention and put all of his attention on him. Why did God cause all of this misery to come to one so insignificant as he? What is man that you should exalt him? So Job felt at this endearing word. Job felt at this moment that God's attention was just unwelcome. If all of his calamity was from the hand of God, Job wondered why God could not just simply leave him alone. And this language of verse 17 is pretty similar to that of Psalm 8 by coincidence. And scholars are divided as to which came first, according to this Anderson guy. And I'm going to look at Psalm 8 real quick, specifically verse 4, which pretty much says a similar thing. What is man that you are mindful of him, and the son of man that you should visit him? And then there's a little note on this. I'm going to go ahead and read it from MacArthur. If the whole universe is diminutive in the sight of the divine creator, how much less is the significance of mankind? Even the word for man in verse 4 alludes to his weakness. And then the son of man here. What is man that you're mindful of him? Just a weak and insignificant figure in this universe that is also looks very, very small. And what is the son of man that you should visit him? And this phrase looks upon man as insignificant and transitory. All right. And yet in the Aramaic counterpart of this phrase, is actually found in Daniel 7:13, which has profound messianic overtones, and also Jesus' favorite self-designation in the New Testament, Son of Man. Now I kind of want to see what it looks like in Daniel 7 real quickly. I'm almost to the end, so I may take a little bit more time with this one. Okay, still looking. Daniel 6. Yeah, Daniel 7. Yeah, this is verse 13. I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. And then it goes on. But yeah, that is talking about Jesus. Yep. And being called the Son of Man. So it is. And also, so that is pretty interesting. And also, Jesus was treated, on the earth as if probably he was nothing and insignificant and all that, especially by his own people. But yet, he still died. He died and rose again, and he was exalted. While on the earth, he took the form of a bondservant, which, a bondservant would basically be looked at probably as insignificant or nothing or whatever. Yep, or a slave or whatever. But yet he did everything that the Father wanted him to do when he was exalted. Yep. So even though it seems as that even though we really are insignificant and nothing because of our sin, but we can only have that value and that worth, because of Christ, and by coming to Christ and repenting. Yep. All right. Yep. We have no value or worth in and of ourselves, but it's only with Christ. Alright, well, I wanted to throw that in there. That's pretty interesting. Alright. And probably that argument and that divide with scholars about which came first, either what Job said in Job 7 or what David said in Psalm 8. So, maybe. Yeah. Now, it would seem best to say that the lines from Job came first, and that David is in Psalm 8. Yeah, and David reworked Job's theme into that psalm filled with praise. I mean, it starts off in Psalm 8, "O Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth." And probably, and I've looked at a Bible reading plan that, and I think this was talked a little bit about in the introduction, that probably Job lived roughly in the time of the patriarchs, maybe right before Abraham, because he was from that same region that Abraham originally was. Yeah, the region of the region of Uz. Sorry, not Uz. So anyway, so yeah, maybe David just used this phrase later on. Alright, let me get back to it. Yep, and Job asked that question, what is man? But he didn't wait for the answer. Man is more than we guess. Else God would never take such time and pains with them. Yep. And when a lapidary spends years over a single diamond, the most careless observer begins to appraise properly its intrinsic value. Yeah. Alright. But, yeah, according to this Meyer guy. But, of course, apart from God, we have no value. Apart from Christ, we have no value because we're dead in sin. Anyway. So God would definitely be mindful of those who are in Christ. So I guess you could say that. And Job definitely was a righteous person. He had faith in the true God. So God was definitely mindful of Job. Yep. And testing him with all of this. And even though Job had these moments of hopelessness and despair and longing for death, I would say God was still upholding him and keeping him, and he ultimately, he did not curse God as the devil thought he was going to, but no. So now he is speaking to God, but he's not cursing God to his face. He's just wondering, why are you focusing so much time and energy on me? Yeah, why don't you just look away from me and let me alone till I swallow my own saliva? And MacArthur has something to say about that. Now, this is actually this strange statement, "till I swallow my saliva," was an Arabic. There we go. Was an Arabic proverb indicating a brief moment. So Job was asking for a moment to just catch his breath, or in the case of the proverb, just to swallow his saliva, or probably also to say, why don't you just give me just a break? Give me a rest for just a second or a minute or whatever. Yeah. It kind of makes me think of that quote from the movie The Incredibles. How many times you save the world, it always manages to get back in jeopardy. Sometimes I just want it to stay saved, for a little bit. I feel like the maid. I just cleaned up this mess. Can we keep it clean for 10 minutes? Yeah, could something just go smooth couldn't you just give it a break? Could something go right for just a little bit before something keeps going, for something to go wrong or continue to go wrong? Yep. So, just give me a break, will you? Come on. Alright. And then Enduring Word has something to say, It also says this is an Arabic idiom, for one instance. just as we say in the twinkling of an eye, basically to express the same idea, according to this Bollinger guy. Job wondered why God could not look away from him for just the smallest moment. Yeah, just give him a break. Yep. Yeah, could stuff not get messy for just a little bit? Could there be a little bit of a relief or a rest, or for the room to stay clean for a little bit? Alright. And then he goes on to say in verse 20, "Have I sinned? What have I done to you, O watcher of men? Why have you set me as your target, so that I am a burden to myself?" Yep, calls God an old watcher of men. Yep. Yeah, please, God, leave me alone. Just leave me alone. And how have I wronged you? Job could not understand why he seemed to be God's target. If Job had sinned, if Job had sinned to cause all of his suffering, as Eliphaz was saying, he asked God, "Why then do you not pardon my transgression?" Yeah. Why don't you just deal with it? If I really am suffering because of sin, why don't you just cleanse me and this whole thing can just stop? Which I think I kind of made a brief statement about that in the previous video. Alright, Job was honest with God in passages like in this verse here, verse 20, and that they seem to have been altered by Jewish scribes who were uncomfortable with this bold honesty with God. And according to Schmick, ancient scribal tradition and the Septuagint show the original reading basically to be, "Have I become a burden to you?" And most translations follow the Hebrew manuscripts, and following the Hebrew manuscripts say it like this: "I am a burden to myself." Yet probably the original text shows how deep Job's grief is, feeling himself to be a burden to what feels like an unloving and uncaring God. Alright. And then this Morgan guy says, Job wondered why God bothered with him at all. Its simple meaning was, God is so great that even if man did sin, it could not affect him. And the answer is that this was all, though, too small of a thought of God. The truth being that God is so great that he is affected, wounded, and robbed by human sin. I mean, he hates it outright, because it goes against who he is as God, perfectly righteous and perfectly holy. Job was, like his friends, hindered by a philosophy that was just too narrow. Yeah, we can't understand the ways of God and all that stuff. Yeah, his ways are higher than ours, his thoughts are higher. So we just have very limited understanding, as is definitely the case in this book. And maybe that's one of the points, our wisdom is so limited compared to God's wisdom, which God's wisdom is going to get talked about later on. And so, how can we really question God? Who are we to say that he should do this or shouldn't do this and all this stuff? Alright. And then Spurgeon has something to say. Yeah, once more, we benefit from knowing the story behind the story, which Job and his friends did not know at this point in the narrative. And Job believed that God was against him and was punishing him, but that wasn't true. Job was not being punished, he was being honored. God was giving to him a name that is like that of the great ones on the earth. The Lord was lifting him up and promoting him, putting him into the front rank, making him a great saint of him, causing him to become one of the fathers and the patterns in the ancient church of God. He was really doing for Job such extraordinary things that you or I, looking back upon in his whole history, might say, I would be quite content to take all of Job's afflictions if I might also have Job's grace and Job's place in the church of God, where you may look back at the suffering and all that you may go through, and maybe you would realize that maybe that was actually, God's goodness even in the midst of that suffering. Maybe helped you become more Christ-like, even if at the moment it was terrible, obviously. And James actually has something to say about this. Let me go ahead and turn to James. I'm going all over the place, but there's just some scriptures that are coming to mind, so it's just being talked about. So since I'm almost at the end, I may want to take a look at them. And if the video is a little longer, then, oh well. I'm sure it'll be worth it. Alright, it's the very first chapter of James. I'll go ahead and look at some of the first few verses. Yep, verse 2. Yeah, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials. 3, knowing that the testing of your faith, as was happening with Job, definitely, produces patience. Yeah, but let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete and lacking in nothing. Yep. Or testing, which means, proof. So, brethren, basically believing Jews that were scattered, James was writing to. And then the Greek word for count may be also be rendered as consider or evaluate. The natural human response to trials is not to rejoice, and therefore the believer must take a conscious commitment to face them with joy. Yeah, even if you may not be feeling happy in the moment. Trials, the Greek word connotes trouble or something that breaks the pattern of peace, comfort, joy, and happiness in someone's life. And the verb form of this word means to put someone or something to the test, with the purpose of discovering that person's nature or that thing's quality. And God brings such tests to prove and increase the strength and quality of one's faith and to demonstrate its validity. Every trial becomes a test of faith designed to strengthen, and if the believer fails the test by wrongly responding, that test becomes a temptation or solicitation to evil. And testing can mean proof or proving. Yep, and the testing can produce patience or endurance or perseverance. Through tests, a Christian will learn to withstand tenaciously the pressure of trial until God removes it at His appointed time, and even cherish the benefit. Alright. And let patience have its perfect worth, that you may be perfect and complete and lacking in nothing. That's verse 4. Now, not perfect in the sense of being sinless, but basically being spiritually mature. Testing of faith drives believers to a deeper communion and greater trust in Christ, qualities that in turn produce a stable, godly, and righteous character. And that all of that may be complete, or all the portions whole. That you would be having that character of God, and that you would need, so that you would become more and more and more Christ-like. Yep. And ultimately, at the end of this trial, it's going to end up making Job a better man, an even more righteous man. Yeah. Where, he realizes that he does not have the right to demand answers or explanations from God for what he does. God's going to challenge him later on. Did you make the earth? Did you do all this? Did you set everything in motion? Okay, well, so why do you demand an answer? Who are you to question God and what He does? Who are we to do that? Even though we want to. Yeah. And Job is still questioning, if I am guilty, how come you don't just cleanse me of sin? Alright, yeah, why don't you just deal with it? And MacArthur says, Job conceded the argument of Eliphaz that he must have sinned, not because he was convicted, but he just seemed to find no other explanation as to why he's suffering. And then Endearing Word finishes this out. Now I will lie down in the dust, and you will seek me diligently, but I will no longer be. Yeah. Job wished he could escape both life and God by going to the dust, or going to his grave. And this is one of the most obviously pessimistic passages about the afterlife. Yeah. I'm pretty much at this moment just thinking I'll just be better off dead or going to dust in the going to the grave, and that's it. Yeah, very pessimistic. Alright, and then there's a quote from this Anderson guy, and that'll be the end of the chapter. All Job has known about God, he still believes, but God's inexplicable ways have his mind perplexed to the breaking point. Now, Job is in the right, but he does not know that God is watching with silent compassion and admiration until the test is finally done and it's time to state his approval publicly. Job 42:8. Yep. Job has spoken rightly, but all these others are not. So, and especially with, him, right in saying that he's righteous and all that. Alright, well, that's pretty much the end of this chapter, and then the next chapter, another friend is going to start talking, Bildad, so stay tuned for next time, Lord willing, but until then, may God bless you, and the grace and mercy won by Jesus, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all.